This is a word problem that gets us to practice the completing the square and solving. A person stands on a cliff that's 55 meters high, throws a stone up in the air, and the stone hits the water of a lake a few seconds later. They give us an equation by a formula. So here's the picture. We've got our cliff, we've got our person standing on the cliff, throwing a stone. And then that stone hits the water. The path of that stone would look like that. And they give us an equation, and the equation looks like this. Oops, I forgot a t. Where t is time and h stands for the height above the water. Does it make sense when time is 0, the stone, if I put in 0 for t, the height is 55, meaning that the stone is at the top of the cliff at that point? That's good? Okay. So if I want to find how long it takes for the stone to hit the water, what will the height be at that time? 0. So we plug in a 0 for h. And I need to solve for t. Now I can move everything. I can move the 5t squared and the 30t to this side and the 55 by itself, so I can get ready to complete the square. This might have been one that might have been possible to factor, but we're going to solve this by a review of completing the square. The idea of completing the square was to get the t in one thing squared so that you could square root to get rid of it. That's the whole purpose of completing the square. Right now, I could get this t squared by itself, but there's still another t, and so square rooting it wouldn't get t all by itself. So a little review of completing the square. First of all, whenever we have a coefficient in front of the numbers, we factor it out. So if I factor out the 5, I'm going to get t squared minus 6t. And after factoring it out, we can leave a space there and a space over here. This middle number, the minus 6t, is going to tell you what needs to go in here. What number has to be in here? If I'm going to square this to get minus 6, this has to be a 3. And if that has to be a 3, the number in here, minus 3 times minus 3, would have to be a plus 9. So a pattern that maybe you're starting to notice is that that number is always half of that middle number. And when you multiply it out, the number that goes in there is always this number squared. Now if I add 9 here, I've actually added to this side 45. So I would need to add 45 to this side as well. Which makes my right side equal to 100. How would I get my squared thing by itself? Can you see I could divide both sides by 5? Which will get t minus 3 squared equals 20. if I square root both sides, remember the plus or minus, and solving for t, add 3 to both sides, square root of 20, you can simplify, it's 2 root 5. So our answer becomes 3 plus 2 root 5 or 3 minus 2 root 5. Now if I want to change those to a decimal, did this question say to the nearest tenth or anything like that? It does say to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to want to get my answers. I'll have to type in one of the answers is 3 plus 2 root 5 and the other answer is 3 minus 2 root 5. And we're going to see what those answers look like when we type them into our calculator. So for our first answer, 3 plus 2 square root of 5. 7.47 to the nearest tenth would be 7.5. Was time in seconds? Add our units. And with this second one, okay, some calculator shortcuts. If you go up and highlight what you had, it retypes it, and then all you have to do is change the plus sign to a subtract sign, not a negative sign. Negative 1.5. Because of the context of the question, does it make sense if you throw a stone, it can't hit the water 1.5 seconds ago? Like that just doesn't make sense in the context of the problem. The only answer that makes sense is the positive answer of the 7.5. So even though we get 2 answers, only one of them makes sense because of the context of our question. All right, questions for practice with this one are number 6 and 7.